This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. Since 2010, we've been broadcasting sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world. I invite you to listen and change how you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. This episode is part of the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World, produced in collaboration with renowned, fair-minded subject matter experts who provide strategies that enhance critical thinking, increase civic engagement, and foster healthy pleasure to boost personal well-being and relationship satisfaction. You can also discover more unique bonus content at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where we are exploring the power of listening, the art of peacemaking and diplomacy. And we are so fortunate to have the executive director of the Nobel Peace Center with us today, and that is Kjersti Fløgstad. And she focuses on using the Nobel Peace Prize to inspire peace through dialogue, a principle central to many laureates' work. With a background spanning both NGOs and business, Fløgstad was Secretary General of UNICEF in Norway from 2000 to 2011 and chair of CARE Norway's board. She later worked as a business consultant, specializing in sustainability and corporate social responsibility before joining the Nobel Peace Center in 2020 after a role at DNB, which is the largest bank in Norway. And we're talking about a little book that I picked up that has changed everything for me in dealing with life leading up to and in the post-election world. And the book is entitled Those Who Listen Change the World, the little book on dialogue from the Nobel Peace Center. Kjersti, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa. I'm thrilled to be here.
I feel like a little bit of a groupie, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we start the conversation about dialogue and this art in peacemaking, can you share a little bit about the Nobel Peace Center's history and the work that it does outside of what we hear about most, which is in science, physics, etc.?
Well, perhaps I should start with Alfred Nobel, the inaugurator or the inventor of the Nobel Prizes. When he died in 1896, in his will, he stated that he wanted 5 prizes to be established in his name with his fortune, because he was the one inventing dynamite. So he wanted his fortune to do something good for the greatest benefit of humankind. So he decided a prize in medicine, physics, chemistry, literature, and peace. The 4 other prizes are given out in Stockholm, in Sweden, whereas he decided that Norway and the Norwegian Parliament was to give out the Peace Prize. Well, the Parliament couldn't deal with that, so they decided to establish a Nobel Institute that since 1901 have awarded the prize of peace to different organizations and most importantly to different people throughout the time. And I must say some of them are really iconic people that we really look up to, and they are so inspiring. And when a person or an organization get the Peace Prize, which is announced in October every year, the world changes for this person or organization because of the prestige of the prize, and everyone wants to listen to them. So it's an important prize with a lot of power and inspiration. And what we have been thinking then here at the Peace Center is that because we are all about talking about the Peace Prize, inspiring around the Peace Prize, and giving people the history of the Peace Prize. But we also want to be important for the future, not only looking backwards. So we think that the power of Peace Prize is ours to spread in inspiring people to learn from the laureates and taking that forward. And so we do that in everything we do, that we try and kind of nudge or inspire people to see possibilities, because I think all changes start with individuals. And in our world today, with so much polarization and people not talking together, hate speeches and whatnot, we are seeing, which I think creates a lot of problems. We also know that many of the Peace Prize laureates actually have achieved things that is almost unthinkable. It's quite large what they have been able to achieve, some of them, and many of them has used dialogue as a method to reach this. So we thought that, well, based on this insight and based on this fact, we could actually take dialogue and look into what is dialogue and what is needed, so that everyone can learn from with inspiration from them, and we can use this to kind of perhaps change the world a little bit, because we think that is needed. So that's background for the whole project.
Which is so impressive. And this little book has contributions from amazing recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, like the Dalai Lama, Betty Williams and Mairead Corrigan, Martin Luther King, Nadia Murad, Desmond Tutu, and more. And when you pick this up and you read through the book, it's so simplistic in many ways, and yet so challenging for us to do when we are angry. I think that's what comes to me when I look at what has happened in the United States and the result of the elections. People aren't talking. People are very frustrated. They're worried. They're frightened. Even those who feel that they were victorious in the election of Trump, they're still walking around angry in many cases.
Yeah, and I'm very happy that you're saying that you find it simplistic, because that's exactly what we wanted to create. Not a 600 pages book about dialogue, but a very, very simple guide to what dialogue is all about. So what we did was to say that we wanted to distill or kind of identify the skills needed or the attitudes needed in order to create dialogue. So, and then to make it quite operational or quite practical for people to understand, what does this mean and how can I go about with that? And then also to give it some examples with the laureates that you mentioned. So we have 8 principles, which is kind of the backbone of everything that we do. And it is simple, yet very challenging, because in theory, I think it's simple. For instance, the first principle is to say that dialogue should be a basic attitude. And that sounds easy, but it means that you need to meet everyone with respect, equality, curiosity, and willingness to be open and listening to everyone you meet. So you have to put aside kind of judgments and your own thoughts, but be curious about the other human being that you're meeting. And of course, in this principle, we have used Dalai Lama, His Holiness Dalai Lama, as an example of this principle, because he lives this principle throughout everything he's doing. So, but actually, I think if we are aware and if we think about it and we try and embed this into our own being and our own way of meeting people, it is possible. But it takes practice and it takes a lot of awareness and willingness to change the way we're thinking about things.
You know, it's funny you talk about this. I had a client this past week who came to me who is on the verge of being let go from a large company because he has a short fuse. I will say had, because he's been successful. And he didn't understand what he was doing wrong because he didn't perceive himself to be an angry person. And when I recommended this book to him, and when we sort of broke down the stages and the principles, he was like, I don't do that. I don't, show up and listen because my mind is going a mile a minute. So I think this first component is to slow oneself down and gift the other person our presence.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. And you pointed out this kind of listening mode, which is we actually call the whole concept "those who listen change the world" because we think listening is kind of perhaps the most important thing of all. We'll talk about that a little bit later also, I think. But to be present and listen to others, really listen, that is challenging. That also sounds so easy, but remember that we are not born on listening, but we are raised with kind of have learned to debate or even discussions. I mean, that's part of our upbringing, to find the faults in other people's what they're saying, judgment. That's what we look at television and all the time. And well, we've heard that we are born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we speak. But in practice, I think, or in the real world, it's hard for us to do that because we are trained to be talkers, debaters, and kind of. And when people talk, we tend to sit there thinking about our next response.
Yes.
So we are not listening to understand, but we're listening to explain or defend. And I think we do wise if we change that and try and really, really listen. What is the other person saying? And we don't need to agree with everything, but we need to try and understand where people come from and why they're saying what they're saying.
I think you make a good point about the power of listening, and listening is not only with the ears, right? It's with the totality of our being. We're also watching for body language, for cues. We're really focused on using multiple intelligences to understand, right? It's not just what we're hearing. So,
That's
I mean,
true.
this is my experience with I call it like the deep listening, where you're just really there with somebody trying to understand where they're coming from. And we've lost that. At least that art is lost here in this country right now.
Yeah, that's true. I think, well, it's not only in the US. I think that's a common issue that we have, and we don't take the time. In the book, we have some recommendations on good listening. So listen to what is being said. Do not let your own thoughts and prejudices interfere with your ability to listen. And then do not give advice until it's requested, which is kind of, do not interrupt. Let the other person finish talking, because, I mean, we get sometimes and I can feel that myself. Sometimes I get very eager kind of to, we have this lively debate or lively talk. But there's a kind of, so we need to de-learn a little bit of the practice that we have, and try and do like what you're saying, deep listening, and then be better at asking questions, perhaps.
Another good point, right? About sort of inspiring curiosity, or, stoking up the temperature on curiosity, or activating curiosity, asking more questions. Tell me more. You don't need to do too much. Just saying, tell me more about that. I'm so interested. And then listen.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's hard because we tend to just shut off if we don't feel that the person that we're speaking with doesn't agree with us. Then, like the walls, the emotional walls come down, and we tune out their perspective, which we miss so much, right? We miss so much of humanity. We miss so much of the problem solving, which ultimately is what this is about, right?
It is. And your point, it's actually, it's very correct what you're saying. And in today's world, I think we have a tendency of creating this echo chamber that gets stronger and stronger. And we very much help with algorithms and all of this as well.
Yes.
And then it's a little bit intimidating, perhaps, or frightening that people mean something else than you, because then you have to kind of revise what you're thinking, or you have to kind of look at it when you're listening to someone else, and that requires a certain patience, perhaps, and it requires a little bit of courage to look at, what are you really saying now, and how did you end with that opinion, and what happened when kind of to try and understand the other's perspective is more work than just to listen to someone that agrees with you. And I think children, we have just seen in research here in Norway among school children, and 10 years old said in this survey that I think it was 42% said they got angry if someone meant something different from themselves. Already then, they are so little curious. And this is a problem, I think, because then also people get afraid of saying what they mean because they're afraid of making other people angry. So then it's also, it creates kind of a room where people are not daring to say what they think either. And then we have a problem for democracy, and we have a problem for creating good solutions together. Yeah. So we need to deal with this.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with my guest today, Kjersti Fløgstad from the Nobel Peace Center. To learn more, please go to Nobel Peace Oslo on X and on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's Nobel Peace Center. And on the website is nobelpeacecenter.org. We're talking about Those Who Listen Change the World, the little book on dialogue from the Nobel Peace Center. Here comes the pause. I'll be right back. Harvesting Happiness is rooted in science. Our work facilitates applied positive psychology practices through media and consulting. We're committed to sound ideas for better well-being, leading to increased life satisfaction and a better world for everyone. We're not into pseudoscience or quick fixes. We're focused on common sense backed by rigorous research. Healthy critical thinking is the foundation for our discussions. We encourage you to challenge preconceptions and explore ideas with a curiously discerning mind. Collaboration with our guests is united by an inclusive vision to boost resilience, critical thinking, communication, and problem solving through civilized discourse and pleasurable relational engagement for everyone. Each day, we have the intellectual freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, regardless of external circumstances. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please seek support, because good psychological health is vital to the achievement of a healthy and satisfying life. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial and educational services that boost emotional and social intelligence. And we're back talking about listening, the art of peacemaking and diplomacy, with Kjersti Fløgstad from the Nobel Peace Center. We're specifically talking about a book that was published by them that I really adore, called Those Who Listen Change the World, the little book on dialogue from the Nobel Peace Center. So, Kjersti, I want to just circle back to something that you said in the last segment about being afraid to speak one's mind, because of making the other angry. You were talking about the survey of the 10-year-olds. And as you were speaking, I was thinking that it's also the fear of rejection, because a basic human need is connection and belonging. That in my experience, when we don't speak up, it's because we're afraid to be rejected and kicked out of the group or the tribe.
I think you're absolutely right. And this is a deep human need to belong. And we are born afraid. And that's a necessity for us to belong, yes, and to be protected. So it's a deep human need to belong to someone, and that people kind of care about us. I think even those that claim they are independent are really not. I mean, I think that's very correct what you're pointing at. So this has two sides, because if we are not able to talk about things in a way that is respectful, and we're not able to create this safe space where people can actually say what they mean, then wording or saying what you mean may feel very, very dangerous. So then we may have a situation where people split up and where we go into our echo chambers that we talked about and talk, only talking with those that agree with us. And it even gets even worse if a group then start kind of strengthening their own group by talking down on the other group and creating this image of rivalry or being enemies. And then we're really bad, because what we should try and do is to try and create safe spaces where people can disagree in a good way, talk about different of opinions, because if we do that, we may find new solutions together. Yeah. We may find happiness, because what I also have read is a researcher has said that the most important, this is your field, but I've read that the most important thing to happiness is your relationships, the
Absolutely.
quality of your relationships. Yeah. Sometimes when people can't talk together, they feel like enemies. It really affects our feeling of our relationships. I mean, I think people get very upset if they have these quarrels and really bad dialogues. So this has so many. I mean, this ability to talk together in safe spaces in a way that is respectful, curious, and trying to find out, where do you come from? Yeah. How do you think, how and why did you come to this conclusion and this belief? I think that's so crucial for everyone to be seen and to be listened to and to dare and say. And when we don't dare to say what we feel because we are afraid of people getting angry, we're afraid of being cancelled perhaps for the consequences of this, then I think we are in a position where we're not able to protect our democracy even, because it's kind of getting so difficult.
And I think this is a very good point you make, that we tend to point fingers, otherize or scapegoat, or lay blame on the other as a way to make order, mental order, out of something we don't understand, right? Which is a fear-based response that we talked about. So the conversation is so important. Tell me why, like you said, tell me why you think this way. I want to know more. Not to put the other down, not to put you down or you to put me down, but to understand so I can walk in your shoes and have empathy. And when I have empathy, then we can get somewhere.
Exactly. There's a Norwegian filmmaker. She lives in Washington. She's called Dia Khan, and she has made Emmy Award-winning documentaries. One was the White Right, Meeting with the Enemy. She she's born in Norway, but parents come from Pakistan. And she wanted to know more about the racism in the US and the neo-Nazis in the US. So she worked a long time to come and meet with some of the leaders of the group. And eventually she was told that she could get 30 minutes or whatever it was with a guy called Jeff Schoops, who was, and they were talking together, and this is documented in this movie, or this documentary. And they sit together, and she is very curious, open, asking just very friendly questions, and he's explaining where he comes from, and he's talking very negatively about colored people. And then she says, it's me you're talking about. No, you're different, he says. No, I'm not. I also have shit skins, like she was kind of pointing at her hand. And then, so what do you mean? No, I don't mean. And then you can see that his eyes start flickering, and he gets kind of a little bit unrestful or unsettled with what he had said. Actually, this conversation and this documentary changed his mind. He decided to leave the movement.
Wow.
And she did not try to convince him anything. She just met him with respect, curiosity, openness, asking questions and listening to him. This is this can happen if we meet.
Yes.
People kind of find a different ground to meet and find different solutions, find different answers. But it won't happen if you point fingers.
No.
And behave as if you think people are stupid. Then they won't change. Then they won't even reconsider. They will claim to their own opinions.
And I don't think anybody can blame them, right? If we feel as though we are disrespected, discounted, not seen, right? It's like you can be there in plain sight, but you're not truly being seen. It's offensive.
It is. And I think that's a kind of a problem we've had with politics, that people perhaps don't feel they have been seen properly and that they're not talked to and listened to. So then they feel this anger, and when then someone comes up and say that they have seen them and have solutions for them, which may not be true even, but just a sense of having been seen and listened to. I think politics can learn a lot from the book of listening.
I think so too, which is why I was so excited to have you on the show, because so many of us, we're at a loss for words, which actually might be a good thing, right? Because we'll shut our mouth.
Yeah, but perhaps we should listen a little bit more to the struggle of people. Yeah.
I mean, all of the struggles are viable. Like somebody says, I'm having a problem with this. I don't have enough money to put food on my table, or I no longer feel as though I have a job. I can have a job or access to education, or these are all legitimate concerns everywhere in the world, not just in the United States.
Exactly. And then we need to acknowledge that. And, sometimes when you listen, you may be hearing things that is very problematic. And it can be very outrageous that people are saying things. So what do you do then if you listen? Well, there is a difference between acceptance and respect. You don't have to accept what they're saying, but you have to respect the people coming up with the message. So you don't have to say, I agree.
Right.
But
I hear you. I hear you. It goes a long way, actually. Yes, I don't really agree with that, but I do hear you. And maybe even going a step further, like I could see how you could think that way, but you might not have all the information, right? And if you're in that information silo that we spoke about earlier, you're not going to get the full story. And that goes for both sides of the coin or the equation or the political party. We tend to just sort of go down one track and get information in one way. That is always going to be tainted a little bit, right? Because we are coming from our perspective and our own lived experiences.
Yes, and the idea is not that, I don't think we should think about dialogue as something manipulative or something that we can use to manipulate people. But so that's very important. It needs to be ethical used.
Yeah.
And it's not meant that you need to change your opinion either, but you can be a little bit wiser and you can be a little bit nicer in meeting people. And perhaps I think, so many of the challenges that we have in the world today, like the climate, for instance, I think it would have been so much more useful if people that disagree could talk about what their concerns are and listen and try and see how can we find a common ground and find solutions, because this is clearly affecting all of us, and we can see it so clearly.
One planet, one home,
one little planet.
One
and
little planet.
That was, I think, when the Apollo 8 went to the moon, and Anders took a picture of the planet Earth, the beautiful planet Earth.
Yes.
And he saw, and they saw, and I think they also said afterwards, the greatest discovery was not stepping on the moon, but it was actually to see the little planet, how vulnerable and lonely it is. And we only have this one planet.
Yeah.
So, we need to solve these issues because we only have, and we're so dependent upon each other. So it's,
We solve it one conversation at a time, and hopefully inspire people to have good, heartfelt conversations with people they might not necessarily know or even agree with. I mean, I think that's where we start.
It is, yeah.
We are out of time on this episode, but the good news is you can hop on over to More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available on Substack and Medium, and pick up the next part of this conversation with my guest today, Kjersti Fløgstad, who is the executive director of the Nobel Peace Center. We're talking about the book published by them, Those Who Listen Change the World, the little book on dialogue from the Nobel Peace Center. To learn more, please go to nobelpeacecenter.org, on X at Nobel Peace Oslo, and on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, Nobel Peace Center. Kjersti, thank you so much. I'm eager to continue our conversation.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thanks for joining us today on Harvesting Happiness. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Kjersti Fløgstad of the Nobel Peace Center, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another. Want to explore more sound ideas for better well-being? You can listen to part 2 of this conversation and the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the excellent team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.